Okay guys, here is our key for the Unit 1 final exam review. I'm just going to go straight through this. Feel free to skip around just to the parts that you need. Remember, if you can successfully go through this Unit 1 review, you should be pretty prepared for the final exam portion that's on Unit 1. So definitely take this seriously. Make sure you know how to do each section. Well, you know the correct formulas, things like that. And you should really be set up for success. So remember, for the whole first semester, so Unit 1 through Unit 5, this reference angle chart is really, really important. So let's see if we can just fill this in together really fast. So here's my key degrees. Okay, and then in radians, this would be 0 pi radians. You could just put 0. This is pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, pi over 2. We use radians most often, but it's still good to know the degrees because we've been evaluating some trig expressions in degrees. I just remember that for 0, sine starts at 0, and this is going to go up to 1, and then it's the opposite for cosine. It ends at 0 and starts at 1. And then from here, we go up. So it's going to be 1/2 root 2 over 2, root 3 over 2. And notice the numerators go 1, 2, 3. So now we're going to go backwards. Tangent, you just kind of have to memorize it. Remember, a good trick for tangent, it is sine divided by cosine. So if you need to, you can always do this divided by this divided by this. So if I start here, 0 divided by 1 is 0. 1 divided by 0 is undefined. Anything divided by itself is 1. And then these you really just kind of have to, the easiest thing to do is just memorize them, but again, you can do or you can just divide these out if you need to. A couple other things to remember. Remember, we have our all students take calculus chart, so I'm just going to add this up here real fast. Remember, our saying is all students take, or pre-calculus. A stands for all trig functions are positive in this quadrant. This stands for sine is the only trig function that's positive. Tangent is the only trig function that's positive. And then here, cosine is the only trig function that's positive. Now, the reciprocals would be 2. So if sine is positive, cosecant is positive. If tangent is positive, cotangent is positive. And then if cosine is positive, secant is going to be positive. Okay? So let's jump down and review. You might need to look at your table later. Okay, let's see if we can find the reference angle. Remember, this is the distance to the x-axis, and we said whenever the number on the bottom is something from our reference angle chart, we can just write pi over that number. So 4, a denominator 4 and 6 are in our tables. So my reference angle here is going to be pi over 4. My reference angle here is going to be pi over 6. Now, a denominator of 5 is not in our reference angle table, so I have to be a little bit more careful with this value. So I'm actually just going to draw a picture to help me out. So here's 0. Remember, over here is pi. Now, since I have a denominator of 5, I can rewrite this as 5 pi over 5. That's still a value of 1 pi. This is negative, so I'm going to go down this direction. So if I cut that in half, that's going to be negative 2.5. And I really don't have to go any further because I recognize that negative 4 pi over 5 is going to go right there. And remember, our reference angle is the distance to the x-axis. Well, these are separated by 1 pi over 5. So the correct answer for this is going to be pi over 5. So pi over 5 for this would have been a good guess, but the reality is with things that don't have a denominator of 6 or 3 or 4 or 2, things from our reference angle table, we aren't always going to get just pi over 5. Here's an example. This isn't this problem, but this is another example. This angle right here would have been a negative 3 pi over 5. And if I look at this distance to the x-axis, that's actually a distance of 2 pi over 5. So when my denominator is 5, I have to be careful. It might not just be pi over 5. For this example, it would have been 2 pi over 5. Okay? So now let's move on to quadrants. Okay? We want to figure out which quadrant each angle lies in. So this hint here was to use the quadrantal. So for degrees, I'm going to use degrees on my quadrantal. So this is 0. Remember, pi or 180 goes over here. Because it's negative, I'm going to go down first. And then we just want to see where this fits. Well, this is going to fit in between 180 and 270. So the answer for this one is going to be quadrant 2. Let's do C since it's also degrees. This one's positive, so I'm going to have 0, 90, 180, 270, but you'll notice 380 is bigger than all these numbers. I know if I go all the way around a circle, this is going to be 360. Well, 380 is only 20 more than 360, so it's going to belong there. If you had something even bigger than this, you could say, okay, well, we go by 90s. So if I added 90 more to this would be 450 degrees, and 380 is between 360 and 450. So this one's going to be in quadrant 1. Okay, so now let's do this in radians. Notice I have pi over 6. There's 2 ways I can do this. Option number 1 is I can say, okay, well, this is 0 and this is pi. Well, since these are in 6s, this is going to be 6 pi over 6. Half of that is going to be 3 pi over 6, and since it's positive, I'm going to go this direction. I have 3, 6, and this is going to be 9. I'm going by 3s. If I went a full circle, this would be 2 pi. So 11 pi over 6 would fit here. So that's one way we could do this. That's going to be in quadrant 4. My second option is to say, well, this is something I recognize from my reference angle chart. And when it's something from my reference angle chart, we can use the trick where the numerator in the first quadrant is always 1. The numerator in the second quadrant is always 1 less than the denominator. The numerator here is always 1 more than the denominator. And here it's going to be double minus 1. Okay, well, notice this is 6 doubled is 12 minus 1, so that also tells me that we'd be in quadrant 4. Okay, one more. This isn't from our reference angle chart, so we're just going to have to draw it out. We actually drew it out above in number 2, in 2 part C. So remember, this would be 0. This is going to be pi. My denominator is 5, so it's going to be 5 pi over 5. It's negative, so I'm going to go down this way. I'm going to cut it in half. So this is going to be in our third quadrant. Okay, I'm going to pause this and then I'll do another video for the next part.